Hello everyone, it's Lindsay, and today is another Tip Tuesday video for you guys, and we're going to be talking about Faber Castell brush markers. So the last few weeks I've been talking about specific products that you can use in Bible journaling, and there is an entire playlist titled Product Info where you can find information about gelatos, Neocolor 2s, watercolor pencils, distress inks, all the things that I've covered so far, and we're nearing the end of the series. I think I only have 1 or 2 more videos left. But today we are talking about brush markers. So I have several Tip Tuesdays and other videos where I've talked about brush markers, kind of the difference between all the Faber Castell pen types, where you've got the regular ink pens all the way up to the stamping markers and what the differences are between them. I also have a Tip Tuesday where I talk about storage for these markers, so be sure to catch that video. I'll link it down below. These markers do have to be stored horizontally. If you store them upright like in a cup or container, it does alter the quality of the color that comes out of the marker, so just be aware of that. But what I have here are the 2 different sizes. You can get the smaller brush marker. This is the Pitt Artist pen, brush pen, and then the Pitt Artist pen big brush, and so you can see it's a fatter end to it. If I was to go back, I would only buy the big markers. I get a lot more use out of these than I do for the smaller markers, but I'll show you in a second why that is. So let me show you some examples in my Bible so you can see where I've used these markers. I've used them to do some stamping. So this word thankful is actually stamped using the big brush markers as ink. And then I've also gone in and done some little art marks. The nice thing about these markers is they are India ink, so they are permanent once they are dry. They won't move with water, and they don't typically bleed through your Bible pages. Of course, always test products in the back pages of your Bible because everybody's Bible is different. And I've noticed some of the colors or how new the pen is also makes a difference, and I'll show you what that looks like here in a minute. But for the most part, it doesn't bleed. It does shadow, but it doesn't bleed through. And most of these markers are translucent enough that you can use them to highlight the text and still see the text, or go over the text and not have a problem. So here I used a yellow and a black, and you can see I colored in. So the yellow, you can see the text, but the black you cannot. But I just went straight. These are not prepped pages. And you can see even that black marker didn't bleed through. The yellow is starting to want to come through, but it was a pretty new marker when I was using it, and I was pretty heavy-handed, and so it was starting to come through, but it's pretty easy to cover. This one here was used coloring in all these shapes with just big brush markers, and because I went over areas multiple times, I did have some bleed through. So you can see, you can really see the color back here. I can just cover this up with some white gesso, not a problem, but it is starting to bleed through, and that's only because I went over the same spot multiple times. It was really heavy-handed, and so it did start to come through the page. But you can see I was able to very quickly create this page and color it in really quick, and didn't have to worry about wrinkling the page or anything like that because it wasn't wet like it is with paint. Here I used it to highlight the verse. This is one way that I use them quite frequently, is to highlight the verse, and then also just add some little art marks onto the page. You can see on the back side here, even that black marker didn't bleed through, so it's just shadowing. And then here I use them again to stamp with. I have a video, I think it's called Fancy Stamping. It's a Tip Tuesday showing how I did the stamping technique, but the yellow and the green was done with big brush markers as the ink. So let me show you on some mixed media paper here some different ways to use the markers and how they perform on gesso versus no gesso. So the top portion of this paper does have some clear gesso on it, and then the bottom half is naked. There's nothing on it. So let me show you some of the different ways that you can use it and how they behave differently on gesso than they do on just regular paper. So I like to use them to stamp with. What I have here is the Element stamp set from Illustrated Faith. I have one of the paint swatches on one side and then just the crosses on the other, so I can show you here kind of the difference when stamping. So if I was just to take the stamp clean and slick and start adding ink to it, you'll notice that the ink kind of wants to, this one isn't too bad because it's pretty new, but it wants to kind of pool and bead up on the stamp. So then when I go to stamp with it, that actually was a pretty good impression because it was on gesso. So let me go ahead and do this down here. You'll notice I don't get a great impression because it's kind of pooling up on the stamp, but I'll show you a trick to get better impressions. So I went ahead and cleaned my stamp. And you want to dirty your stamp, so either rub it on the back of your hand or take an eraser and rub an eraser over it until you can see that it has a matte finish, so that stamp is no longer shiny and I can kind of feel that it has texture to it. Now when I go over it with my marker, the ink has something to kind of grab a hold of, and so it does better on a dirty stamp. So I'll go ahead and stamp that down. And I don't know, it's pretty close because this is a pretty good new marker, but it does typically stamp better on a dirty stamp than on a clean stamp. You could just get a solid impression, but you'll see it's still not perfect, and that's just the nature of stamping with these, is you're just not gonna get a perfect stamp no matter what you do. If I was to use the smaller brush markers, this is why I prefer the bigger ones. So with the smaller ones, it's a lot harder to cover the entire area. It takes a little bit longer, so then I'm fighting with the ink drying as I'm working with it, and it just is not, it's not as easy to work with the smaller pens as it is the bigger pens. So if you're going to be stamping with them, you want to go with the bigger pens. They stamp really well with stamps like the crosses and just textures and things like that, that isn't just one solid blob of stamp. They work better with this. You can see the impression is much better with a stamp like this than that ink swatched stamp. So you can use them to stamp with. You can also use them with the ink smushing technique. So I'll go ahead and add some marker. This is just some plastic packaging that I have, just some trash, and I just went ahead and colored directly onto the plastic. I'll add a little bit of water, which will activate. If I let that ink completely dry on that plastic, it may become permanent because it is an India ink. So you do want to work kind of quickly, but you can see I can go ahead and, just like I do with watercolors and distress inks and gelatos and watercolor crayons, all those mediums, I can go in and ink smush. And then when this is dry, it is 100% permanent, won't move anymore after that. So you can do that. Of course, you can do just, you know, art marks and things like that. If you're working on gesso, you have some time to kind of smudge out the marker. So if I immediately go in with my finger, I can move it around and smudge it out. I can't do that as much on an unprepped page. The gesso creates a barrier on the page, and so that ink is kind of sitting on top of the page and not sinking into the fibers of the page, and so it gives you some time to go in and smear the ink around a little bit. So if you had like a die cut and you're wanting to add some shadowing around the die cut, you could go ahead and do that. This works even better if you use matte gel medium as opposed to gesso. So let me see, like this. So matte gel medium is a really smooth, slick, it's like a glue, and so you can get even more time to smudge around the color if you use this as opposed to gesso. Gesso has a little bit of texture to it. I use this clear gesso here. Even this gesso, which is really smooth, does still have a little bit more texture than the matte gel medium. So if you're wanting to do some blending and things like that and smudging out, you'll want to use matte gel medium. So you can do that. Another way that you can do, and this is a trick I got from Hillary from Creative Faith Co. She had seen one of my Tip Tuesdays using baby wipes and watercolor, and so she started doing this technique. So I picked it up from her. Neither one of us can vouch whether it ruins your markers or not, so just heads up on that. We haven't had any problems with it ruining our markers yet, but I don't know what would happen. So you can go ahead and take a baby wipe and then just pick up a little bit of the color on the end of the baby wipe and then use it to blend onto your page, and you just get this really soft watercolor look that way, and you don't have to worry about bleed through because it's just applying a little bit of color, but it gives you this really soft washed out look that you can't really achieve just coming straight from the marker. So you can use that. She has some images over on her Instagram, I'll link her down below, where she's done that technique, and it's super, super awesome. Of course, you can go in and color in stamped images, highlight words, and things like that. I imagine you can go ahead and color texture paste. That's something that I've been doing quite a bit of. Let me find my texture paste. Here it is. So if I go ahead and put some marker sorry, that's super annoying. Put some marker ink onto a clear acrylic block or any non-stick surface like a craft sheet, and then take a little bit of texture paste and mix it into that marker. I can go ahead and tint texture paste. You could do the same thing with gesso, matte gel medium, any of those products like that. And then now I have a custom tinted texture paste that I can put through a stencil if I wanted to. So because it stays wet a little bit on this non-stick surface, I can go in and color things like that. So you may not need to have every single product that I've shown in these Tip Tuesdays. Just take a look and see what you can do with each one, and if it's enough of the different things that you want to do. So if you're wanting to color texture paste, you don't have to get distress inks just to color texture paste. You can do that with these markers and some of the other products that I've shown. So of course there, you can do some brush lettering because it has a flexible brush nib. You can go in and get your thin and thick brush strokes and have kind of a calligraphy look, and so you can go ahead and do some hand lettering in your Bible journaling, and you can do that with these markers. So you can even go, if you wanted to do, let's see, let's say that I wanted to have some varying colors. I'm trying to pick some colors that'll work for this. Okay, so I'm going to scribble down a little bit of blue, and then I'm going to take my yellow marker. I know this is scary, but I'm going to go ahead and pick up a little bit of that blue, and then as I write, I'll have green that'll fade out to yellow, and it'll fade out as I write with it. And so you can do some fun lettering techniques that's super fast and not fancy at all, but you could go in and do it really fancy and get a fun blend. And then if I just scribble this out, I'll get all that blue out and I'll be back to, you can see, a nice clean yellow marker. So have fun mixing colors and doing some shading and things like that with it. And I do just want to make sure that I clean this up because it is India ink. It will be permanent once it dries. It takes a long time to dry on a surface like this, but it would be permanent. And then with your stamps, just use a baby wipe to clean them and they should be fine. So if you have any questions or maybe some tips for other ways that you've used these markers, be sure to leave that down in the comments down below. Give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful. Subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. We have just another couple weeks of these Tip Tuesdays with the specialized products, and then we'll be back to regular Tip Tuesdays. So until next time, thank you so much. Bye-bye.